Yes. All right, got my mic unmuted.
Hey, Tim,
Hey, man.
getting everything checked out here.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm here. All right, got my mic unmuted.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, man.
Checked out here.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm here. All right, got unmuted.
Oh,
Hey, man.
checked out here.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm here. Okay. Unmuted.
Oh,
Hey,
checked out here.
man. Oh, yeah. Well, I'm here. Okay. Unmuted. Hey, man.
All these things turned off sound wise. I'm not hearing the rumble anymore. I guess I got that.
Yeah, that kind of cut that reverb out of it there.
I got to remember to always turn all the machines off there.
Oh, yeah. You got to turn the volume off on everything, whatever it ain't playing back through.
It does a pretty good job on the Zoom to kind of filter it all out, but it's
Yeah.
slow go.
I'm
Well,
gonna
you
run and
came.
grab me a bottle of water right quick before we get started.
Okay.
All right.
There's
Good, good.
Fred. Dwayne got tied up. He's not going to be able to pop in.
Okay.
It's a little cold up there. He's heading to his son's house. Set these up a little bit. Well, hi everyone. Welcome to Thursday Night Saws. Tim Ard here. I hope you've had a great week. We are getting started up tonight. We've got a little bit of discussion going on saw chain preferences, and I've got some experts with me tonight. They use the saws a lot more than I do now. I used to put a little time on them, but in the past few months, I've kind of got to even start the saw now. But thought we'd have a little bit of question and answers on that, and saws and saw chain, and then we're going to take and go through some of the announcements and things like that after that. But that'll be later on. And so I hope that y'all recognize a couple of the guests tonight. And one of them is Tim O'Brien. Everybody knows him as Cotton Top 3. Very privileged to have him as part of our panel here tonight. Dwayne Newstetter just had sent me a message. He's up in the mountains of Canada, so he's have a little bit of an issue, and I think he's heading over to his son's house about something. So he'll be back with us next week, he promises, but we'll see how the weather holds out. Chris Childs is here, and he's been helping out with forced applications. He's coordinator for God's Pit Crew and all the chainsaw operations, and he's been running the saw now for quite a bit on storm and stuff. I don't know if Robert will drop in tonight, and Warren, I hadn't heard back from him. I think he was heading out to do something, but maybe he'll drop in a little bit. But I'm Tim Ard, and I hope that you find some interesting things tonight as we discuss through some different things of saw chain. And I just wanted to kind of check out, Tim. You can tell a little bit about what you do in case they don't know, but and then we'll talk to Chris. And Chris has got an interesting program he's got started up with grinding and sharpening hand as well as machine on the crews for the volunteers and things. And so he's got some interesting stuff there. So is my sound coming through okay?
Yeah, it's coming through good.
All right, very good, very good.
I think Chris's mic is still muted over there on his, I believe.
Yeah, I muted it. But I'm here.
Oh, yeah.
Let's see here. I still got well, put the record back on so we can put it on Instagram for tomorrow. We got it simulcasting tonight to Facebook and YouTube, and I'll put a hard copy back up on Instagram tomorrow. So we've had some pretty good comments coming in this past week about different things we talked about last week, and some old timers are on there, Tim, and back in and people that we hadn't heard and seen in quite a while. So it's quite interesting last week. But this week on some saw chain, what do you think the thing is that we need to discuss when it comes to saw chain? What's the best kind out there? What's the best tooth profile, pitch, gauge, hardness, dirt chain, sharp chain, whatever it might be? Because I hear that all the time. People are pretty opinionated on saw chain. I guess rightfully so, because it doesn't make any difference what size chainsaw you have if that chain's not sharp, you're not going to do much, are you?
No, it's and that's crazy because that's one of the biggest questions that I get is about saw chains. And so the problem is with it, there are tons of different chains to pick from. And then there's only a few select people that really use them, like you or Chris or me, or people who run them and use them that can walk into a store and know what to get, because there's so many doggone choices out there. It's crazy. And most dealers, I'd say probably, I'm going to take a guess and just say, like, current day dealers, 90% of dealers, they don't know all the different, chains that are out there either. But, when I get a question, I ask them, what kind of cutting are you doing? Are you doing storm work where you're going to be cutting dirty wood? Are you cutting at the ground a lot of times? Are you going to be cutting up to where the chain is going to, not be prone to hitting the ground? Then that narrows it down to kind of two things for me right there. That narrows it down to a full chisel, which is your 90-degree top plate, the fastest cutting chain out there, or in the least forgiving chain too. So if you knock that point off, you lose production on it really quick. Or you've got the other option as a semi chisel, which is kind of a rounded corner. So if you're cutting in dirty wood or something, along those lines, the semi chisel, like the Stormwork, stuff like that, that's predominantly what I recommend, people to run. But
Semi chisel.
yeah, semi chisel on that. I've run them all. I've run all gauges. I've run all styles of chains and every brand. I run Oregon, Steel, Husqvarna. I've run it all, just full skip, semi skip, full house. Run it all. Run, square ground. I've done it all, and I can tell different things about each one of them, and then I can tell kind of my favorite chain that I run, and then and all that. So I mean, it's just wherever you want me to start on that, I can go. I can go in any different direction.
Let's back up a minute. What you were talking about first there was this corner right here.
Correct. Correct.
Now
Yes.
I guess Oregon originally called it a working corner, and then I call it point.
Mm-hmm.
But semi chisel you're saying is rounded, and
Mm-hmm. That's right.
you've got a larger surface there in the corner, and so it'll take a little bit more abuse.
Mm-hmm.
They both
Correct.
they both dull about the same if you hit a nice granite rock or something. But as
If you
far
stick
as
in a piece of metal, yeah, something hard, a concrete, rock, shingles are bad juju on a chain.
it's like cutting sandpaper. I had a guy after it was Hurricane Wilma years ago going across Florida. We were down there, and I had a group of Oregon guys. We set up grinders, and we were grinding for the storms we were talking about the other day. And there was this one guy came up, and we had a long line, people bringing in chains. We were sharpening them for free and put it on the radio and stuff. And this one guy came up and he come over. He said, "Come here, I want to talk to you, man." He said, "I just got this chain just a day or two ago," and he said, "I went home and I didn't cut 10 minutes, and it just quit cutting, and I just got it. I think it's a bad chain." And I looked at it and I said, "Well, sir, I don't know. It looks like you've hit some." "Oh, no, 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 no. I didn't hit anything. I've been running salt. I didn't hit anything." I said, "Well, you see here, these points are kind of damaged. But I tell you what, if you'll wait in line, we'll get it fixed up for you." And so the
Mm-hmm.
guy started grinding on it, and he was coming over talking to me about it. And I said, "You don't think you hit anything?" He said, what do you mean?" I said, "Well, if you hit the dirt just like that, I mean, that's all it takes to
It's
take
done.
the
Yeah.
off of it." And he said, "Well, maybe I did hit." So he said, "I'm from Michigan." He said, "When you talk about hitting the ground, I thought you was talking about rocks and stuff. I didn't think that sand would dull it too bad. It does. It works like sandpaper, doesn't it?"
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then
It's
the other thing you were
believable.
talking about there, and I've got this. Let's see what. I've got some pictures here that I had put together. These are the 5 parts you talked about: the depth
Mm-hmm.
gauge, point, top, side chisel. Some people call them different things, but more or less that's
Mm-hmm.
that's about it. And then just the whole tooth, and then here's the parts. You can see uh,
Mm-hmm.
that depth gauge sitting up there, and that
Right.
regulates how deep it goes.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Because
And
a saw
then
chain is nothing but a planer, is all it is. Just a
yeah,
small, very small planer.
kind of turned upside down and taken out a chip, just like a wood plane.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
That's
And
right.
then the point here we just discussed semi chisel or full chisel, and then whoops, and then we've got the top angle here. I got me a new foot paddle. I don't laugh.
Might have should have. Did you do any testing with it, Tim, or
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
not?
I worked with it all day yesterday,
Did you?
and it's been doing pretty good. And so this top angle here, and I guess in all the gamuts, it could run 15 degrees on on full chisel square ground to about 35 degrees on like
Correct.
4 pitch, semi chisel anyway. And then we've got the chisel angle going from that point down underneath, and that's works with the radius of the top of the file. And there's different grinds on that. That's what the round file or your chisel bit file does. And then the side plate, and this is affected. I found a guy was showing me it's affected by the depth gauge setting quite a lot of how, well, doggone it, how it works there. And if you take here and think about whole thing just kicked off, didn't it?
There we go. You hit the wrong button again.
Huh? my whole screen.
There it is.
Oh yeah, we got it now.
All right. So on this one, that line goes kind of like 90 degrees down. It's concave there, but it's 90 degrees. But you can see how as you drop the depth gauge down and it starts to, as you talk about a wood plane or a plow, it changes that angle, doesn't it?
Right. As you file that tooth back, as you sharpen it, it doesn't matter whether you're hand filing it or you're grinding it like Chris is doing on a lot of his situations. You have got to take that depth gauge or raker or drag, whatever it is. You got to drop that thing down too, because you want, the sweet spot's about 25 thousandths of an inch. I've seen you might can get away with 27 around here, but even in our softwood here in the southeast, our softwood is actually still pretty hard. And you ain't gonna get away with taking that raker down too much.
I think a lot of people across the country don't understand that, because I get that question all the time. You cut that pine down in Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi, and
Sure.
you get out west, the cedars and the Douglas fir and that kind of stuff is heavy wood. It's big wood, but it's pretty soft to cut actually. And then you get into the southern hardwoods. If it's a fairly fast growing southern hardwood, it cuts pretty doggone easy. Now, when it gets dried out for firewood, it's a little bit different. But then the other thing that I've noticed is a pretty slow growth loblolly pine, 30-inch to 5 feet that's some of the toughest stuff on pulling the saw power down, and
It is.
because it's got a lot of sand and stuff in it as it grows and stuff like that. You got a lot of vibration, but that's something that it doesn't really make any difference though. In some areas of the country, they grow differently and different things apply it, but all wood can be cut pretty good if you've got a sharp chain and it's set up properly.
Correct.
So now go on with what you were saying, and I got a big tooth here if you need to point
Right.
it out or anything.
That's right. So that top of that tooth, if you look at that one, he's got the red mark on where it says side plate 90. If you look, that tooth is angled back, and as you sharpen it, that gap between the top of that top plate and the top of the raker actually closes up. So that's the reason why, I've had people come through with saws and, you put it on a limb and it basically, the saw just kind of will almost ride the limb because the raker or the depth gauge is not allowing it to plane any of the wood off to take any cut off. So it's kind of, with chainsaws, you're dealing with thousandths of an inch, and a thousandth of an inch can make a very big difference on what the performance of a chainsaw is. You can have a chainsaw that you've got $3,000 worth of engine work in, this ported, polished, time in advance on it, everything, machining been done on it and everything. But it all boils down to, what is that chain on your guide bar going to do when you stick it in the wood? And if that chain's not tuned up the way it should be, even that saw that's got thousands of dollars worth of work on it is not going to cut. It's not going to do anything. And a lot of times I tell people, they come in, the guys having a saw is kind of a macho thing. and they come in and they're wanting to, they're wanting to learn, they're wanting to learn more about saws. And the simplest thing you can do to learn, the quickest to make a saw really perform, is learn how to sharpen a chain to get 100% performance out of it. And it's a lot of people make a big deal about it, but it's once you understand, there's a lot of good videos on YouTube talking about chainsaw sharpening and things. And once you kind of understand the different parts of the chain and then the tolerances, and then the other thing is, the different chains, different size chains, you got different size files that you need to match chains with, like a normal 3/8 chain. You're going to file it with a 7/32 file, most of them. Some of them you're going to file them with a 1364 file, but most of them are 7/32 or a 5.5 millimeter. You drop back down into the 3/16 chain, then you're going to file them with a 3/16, well, a 325 chain. You're going to file it with a 3/16 file or a 4.8 millimeter. And then, of course, you got the smaller chain that's even the 5/32, and then you got the quarter pitch. So there's a lot of things there. And the cool thing about it is when you buy a chain and you get the box, on the box it will tell you the angles and the size file that you need to file it with is right there on that box, and everything. So, and that's a lot of people take them out of the box and they chunk the box, and then they don't know what to do. But all that information is right there on the box.
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people are sometimes intimidated by all the differences. I know I counted one time there's 26 different variations of chain that we sold.
Yeah.
And you start looking at that, it gets kind of confusing sometimes. But then if you've got a certain size chain that you're using for a certain range of saw size, it's not that hard to keep up with it if you understand how it works. And I always
Right.
if I understand how it works, then I can generally make it work and do a pretty decent job of it. And so that's kind of the key. But as you start cutting, it's a variable. Every stroke that you make is a variable, and there's the size file, and then you got a choice of either freehanding it, holding the file just with no type of another apparatus or guide on it, and then you've got different guides and things that can help you to be able to keep it there. And a lot of people say, well, I just like freehanding it. It's much faster. Well, actually, I found in a lot of cases that guides can make it faster because you can do more consistent work throughout the chain, and it takes away some variables. Because one thing that people have trouble with is they don't get all of the damage off of it, or either their file, if it's the right size, if you hold it a little bit high or a little bit low, and then you start to think, and I think that's the reason why a lot of times people take the depth gauges, the rakers, down quite a lot, is to compensate for a thinner edge here. Because if you think about this as it starts to rock down, if you take this depth gauge down more, then more or less it's going to take and do what? It's going to change the angle of that tooth as it's starting into the wood, and then it rocks back once it loads the tooth. But then it does that number throughout the cut of each chip, or the taking a ribbon out between it actually. So this edge right here, kind of like a working plow, if you don't change that, okay, in other words, you don't keep it consistent there, not as much change it as keep it consistent. But as that goes down because you've lowered the depth gauge, look how steep that gets. And so now it starts to really dig in, and that can cause it to be very aggressive. It can also change reactive forces. And so the depth gauge regulates that, just like you were talking about with a wood plane, to keep how deep it's going to try to go into the fiber. And on the other hand, though, and one guy told me you can tell more about a filing process below the rivets than you can above them.
Sure.
because
Absolutely.
if somebody takes and you've got a dull saw chain and you're pushing on it, it's going to rock back or it's going to rock forward. You start to see either the leading or the heel start to wear more than the other. You can see that you have sprocket wear in here. You can, and if you take the depth gauge down too much, you're going to see a lot more wear running the rails on the front. If you see somebody that pushes on the chain, you're going to see a lot of either even wear or it's going to be the back or front. Usually the back is going to be starting to really wear. So there's a lot that you can tell, about your cutting techniques as well as your filing techniques below the rivets.
So, and you just touched on something right there. A lot of people discount the chain as far as it needing to be sharpened and needing to be sharp. Because if the chain is not sharp and you're having to try to lean on the saw, you're increasing the wear on your chain and on your bar like crazy. But the biggest thing is the amount of heat. Tell me one time what you said on the test that y'all did about the heat in the bars with Oregon. Then you tell me that some of them bars could get up to 1,000 degrees or whatever that and heat in them.
Close to it at that time, and it's changed a lot since lightweight bars and stuff like that, more composites and things that they use.
Mm-hmm.
But in that time when we were looking at running lighter weight, building lighter weight bars, and then also we were looking at the Vanguard chain at that time. We are testing to see what the heat was, and the average was like 450 degrees on several of the chain models, and pretty standard on the bar lengths. If you ran it dull and you applied pressure, which was metal against metal, the
Mm-hmm.
temperatures on some of the combinations ran close to 1,000 degrees.
Right. And not only are you putting wear on your bar and chain, but you're also working on your sprocket out there a little bit. But your clutch and everything on the inside of it's going to be generating a lot of heat too.
Mhm. And a lot of pressure can happen on the crankshaft itself once that heat gets started. You lose outer seals, bearing problems, all that kinds of stuff.
Right.
Vibration starts if you've got the chain too aggressive. If you have
Mm-hmm.
a loose chain, what does that do?
Yeah, it eats a sprocket up.
Sprocket damage, the chain's rock and rolling all the time, and then some people tighten it up too much.
Mm-hmm.
I
The
talk to
biggest
a lot
thing,
of people say, I don't want it to jump off.
well, the one of the biggest problems as far as loose chain goes is hitting yourself with the chain when it comes off because that's more, there it's doing damage to the saw, but it can hurt you big time too because it can end up slapping you anywhere when it comes off. And I mean I've had them even with good saw pants on, hit me hard enough to where I knew it, and even having all that Kevlar in it.
Yeah. Yeah, they have some spinning ability when they come off there. That's what chain catch is for, and one of the safety features is stop that rotation, but you still got the flip of the chain. I have heard stories. I've never seen it happen. I did have one. It was a racing chain up in Boonville, New York, one time that it broke, came off, and went towards the stands with one of the competitions. But the that's the only time I've ever seen one come off. But I've had several stories that people said that chain broke and came off the bar and went towards somebody or hit somebody. But I don't know. Most of the time, it seems like if you got a chain catch on there, it seems to wad up and stay there on the bar, but it will come back around and slap you in the leg pretty good. On a longer bar situation, it'll come back or wrap around your arm in some cases. But it's something that a lot of that happens because of the wear, running the chain dull or running it too aggressive and that wear, and it gets into the rivets. Next thing you know, something pops loose and goes. So that's something to kind of consider there. But I guess the guy who showed me too, his name was Jerry Blaine. He was one of the tech services with the steel back years ago. And he was kind of into car racing and always messing around with the engines. And Roger Simons was that way too. He was director of technical services and in a lot of the testing and stuff that went around for years and years. And more or less, um, he would really do a lot with porting and all that kind of stuff. With saws that come out, we were constantly looking at different modifications to take away problems in our altitudes and weathers and stuff like that. And one of the things they showed me, and we talked about this a little bit before, is that on the carburetor adjustments and stuff, when you think about that flutter point, right there where that flutter is right at the edge of going to a lean sound to a four-stroke sound, that's the maximum power. And so what we do is we set it up, and it's best to really do it in the wood, and when you start to listen to it, you want to get your chain set and your RPM and load set to where that sound evens out, is consistent all the way through the log. When you start applying pressure and you see your chain start to slow, even though it's making a lot of dust and a lot of noise, you're losing cutting capacity. And so that that edge right there is as an operator to really cut fast saw racing. And that's where we got in those discussions, because we were starting the timber sports at that time. And the guys were taking a lot of power and stuff and run it down through it. Well, Jerry got to where he started. The guys didn't want to use hearing protection and stuff either. And Jerry was saying, "I'll show you something." And we got out there playing with earmuffs and tuning the earmuffs to the saw, and then checking the RPM, had a tachometer on them, and we sit there and try to hold it right at that particular break point. And every single time, that was the fastest place on every saw that we tried. And so a couple of the guys, they we was talking to them about it, and they started playing with it, and they had some good scores, good times on the because we were using stock saws at that point. We weren't really involved in the modifieds, but the guys who were running the stock saws, they'd either try to take the power down too much, put too much pressure on it, or they would take and drop the depth gauges down before they came. They had that option to do. They could set that up, and we did that in game of logging also, of taking, and they got a chain and two files and a flat file, and they had the ability to take about 30 minutes to set their chain up, and Soren would go around with a file and dull all the points off of it. The guys had to put the points back on, taking the damage off, and then filed the chain, and then they competed in 3-time cuts, and then they used that same saw felling the tree pulls for the competitions. And
Mhm.
it was quite, when you go through it from that aspect, and you do it every day sitting there like this. I was going to say, you talk about keeping it out of the dirt. You're up there at 92 feet, so I don't know what you're going to get into up there. But when you start to think through it, you do a lot of cutting on the ground too. But when you think about those abrasives and those kinds of things, that can change really sometimes your sharpening aspects. You got to get that damage off and get everything back in kilter with the concave and the depth gauge and how far back. And I see so many times when people, well, I'll take 3 strokes off each one or whatever. And if you've done it as many times as you have, you can do that pretty good. But if you don't understand how much pressure you're applying on that tooth, and then you got to think about, if you don't have all the teeth exactly the same length, then that affects your depth gauge setting. It's not necessary to have every tooth the same length, as long as it's taking the same bite. The depth gauge setting taking the same bite, that you can have short teeth, long teeth, it'll still cut straight. But naturally,
Correct.
you want to keep it as long as possible, because that's what you bought. You don't want to waste chain. But if you
Mhm.
damage this one, you could shorten it up. As long as you set it to take the same bite, it'll cut straight with the rest of them. But a lot of times people can't do that, because they're trying to count strokes across it or whatever. And some people take a little bit with a stroke, some people take a lot with a stroke, and you end up, that's where gauges and guides and those types of things can come into place when you're trying to correct a lot of damage. And that's what I see to be the biggest thing, is it's not as much sharpening as it is repairing in a lot of cases.
Correct. And if you keep the chain sharp, you just touch it up. I mean, I see people, they'll file and file and file and file and file. And sometimes you may not need that. You may only need just 3 strokes and go on to the next tooth, and you don't have to, because as you're filing your money off that chain.
Yeah. They're not as cheap as they used to be. That's for
No,
sure.
they're not cheap. And that's one thing I was going to talk about too. You talked about the chains. Some of these steel chains, like the 33 RS, I mean, them things have gotten on up there. So if you get a 32 or 28 or something like that, I mean, you're going to pay for one of them chains now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's quite an investment now, and it's something where that if you understand it, you can get the max life out of them as long as you don't hit something.
Right.
Um, that's the key is keeping it all in.
Well, I know Chris. I've been around Chris, and me and Chris have a great mutual friend and everything. Every time I get around old Rook, we talk about Chris a good bit. But Chris ain't no slouch in the chain sharpening department. When we were over at Rome that day over there, I was scoping Chris's 362 out he was running that day, and I'm assuming you sharpened that chain, Chris, because that son gun was cutting. And you may say you sharpened it and somebody else did, but I'm gonna assume you sharpened that thing.
I just did what Tim Moore told me to do.
There you go. There
Yeah.
you go.
Yeah.
Well, it was cutting, that's for dang sure.
Yes, sir.
So you had asked about there's so many different chains out there, and I've run them all, and I'll just put in my 2 cents on this. My favorite chain to run and that I like the most, and I like the temper of it. However, this is going to be by far the most expensive chain to buy is the steel 33 RS. It's a good chain, but I don't run it primarily because of the cost of it, because it is, like I said, it's the most expensive one that you can buy. My favorite chain that I run, there's two of them. It's basically the same chain. It's both by Oregon, and one of them is the 72 EXL,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a 3/8 50 gauge chain, non-skip, full chisel, full house chain, if you want to call it a full house. I run that on pretty much everything up to 28 inches. And then when I go above 28 inches, if I go to 32 or 36 or anything longer than that, I run the 72 EXJ, which is the exact same chain. It's just in a full skip version. Full skip version means it skips a tooth. So say you got 100 cutter teeth on it, then if it's a full skip, that drops it back to 50 cutter teeth. And on the longer bars, it makes it more efficient to sharpen them. But here's the main reason that I run the Oregon stuff. It's great stuff, really good stuff. But the biggest reason I run Oregon stuff is because what they do in the event of these disasters, they're like Chris and they're like Warren. I see Warren's and showed up down there.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't know what Guy's pit crew is, what Warren does over there and everything like that. They chase these disasters and they do it. They're nonprofit organizations. And Oregon does the same thing. If there's a tornado somewhere or a hurricane comes in or anything like that where there's wood on the ground, Oregon has a team of people that they send out to wherever those locations are. And you've been with them before, Tim, and because you talked about that a while ago.
That's what
And
I saw about Wilma. Yeah.
they set up a booth somewhere and they sit there and sharpen chain after chain after chain for free. And they'll work on saws a little bit, if it's something minor, and everything. And I support them because they do that. You see what I'm saying,
Mm-hmm.
So, and I make my own chains. I buy them by the 100-foot spools, and I make them down there in my shop down there and everything. I've got a breaker and a spinner. So that's my 2 cents on chains and why I run what I run right there.
What, Chris? What you had mentioned some filing devices. What is it that you have? I know, you deal with a lot of people who are part-time operators or volunteers. They don't necessarily have a lot of firewood experience. They don't necessarily have a lot of cutting experience, but they want to help out. They run a chainsaw, and you've gone through some teaching and training with them. And I guess the biggest thing is trying to get people to understand when is it sharp and when is it dull.
Yeah.
After that, you've got to do some maintenance. And, we've talked about before of sharpening about every tank of fuel or whatever and watching not to hit the dirt and the rocks and the debris and the trees. And so, but then there becomes a time where you got to do something with it. I know you've got two systems that you use, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. So on a busy day in the trailer, my guys will have to sharpen 40 to 50 chains. So they've been working all day. They come back to eat, and then they got to go out in the trailer and get all the saws ready for the next day. So what we've got is we've got two steel bench grinders. What I did about 6 months ago, we converted everything. So when I first got there, you know how many chains there are. We had 40 different saws and probably 30 different chains. So that's a problem. So what I did, I simplified everything to where it's all running a 3/8 50 gauge across the board on all of our saws other than pole saws and top handles. So we got a bench grinder, one set for the left and one set for the right. I got two guys sitting right beside each other. Zip, 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 zip. They work them down, and then I got a guy sitting beside them with a little bar set up where they can sit the flat file and flat file the depth gauges down.
Yeah.
And they can work through them in no time compared to what we used to have to do.
And then you have some hand filing also.
Yeah, we use the Ferd 2-in-1 on all the smaller stuff. So all the pole saws, all the top handles, we use the 2-in-1.
So that was I think I've got one out here. This, what you said, Ferd is it's basically what they produced as a CSX tool.
Yeah.
And, they manufacture it for steel, and the steel calls it the 2-in-1 tool.
There you go.
And so it has a flat file in it, two round files, and it has to be set. You have to have the one for your particular chain size, like Tim was talking about. But once you got that, you can be able to, go through it pretty good, and it sets your depth gauge at the same time.
Oh yeah, yeah, I love them. So we run a 3/8 full chisel on everything. We make our own chain. So what we've got now is I've got 20-inch bars, 25-inch bars, 28-inch bars, and 36s.
Mm-hmm.
But we're running the same chain across the board, so we can buzz through sharpening really quick. And then each crew has a crew leader that's a skilled guy, and he's pounding in their heads, don't get it in the dirt, don't hit this.
Does that
Just kind
work?
of watches everybody.
Does that work?
Huh?
Does that work?
It does. Yeah, I always joke around with him. I tell him if you don't listen to your crew leader, we can make you a limb dragger for 3 or 4 days, and then you'll start to listen a little bit better.
So as far as the machine, I do think there's several different units out that do about the same job. It's like I always go through with the hand filing. There's several tools. You got the standard. I think Tim, you use
That's it. That's what I use.
If you're not freehanding, you use a guide like this, and
That's it.
takes some of the variables of high and low as far as where that file sits in that concave radius of the tooth. And then some people like the pocket tool that Husqvarna has, which is a roller guide, and it has a little bit different depth gauge tool, which I think you use that also. That each depth gauge in each tooth separate, so you're not averaging it out. So that really makes it so it all cuts straight if you've got different heights of points and stuff, and that holds your file up on the rollers. And then you use a chisel bit file, which is triangular file, more or less, either the double bevel or either a triangle. I've seen you use them
Right.
both. And
Mm-hmm.
that's for your square ground chain.
That's right.
And then you got I've got one of the new hexa files also. What you were talking about a while ago, and maybe I can see if I can get a good picture here, is that you were talking about full skip chain.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've got two drive links in between each cutter. And then you've got a semi skip that has a cutter, one drive link, a cutter, two drive links, a cutter. And then you've got
Right.
a full complement chain, they call it, which is this one. It's got a cutter, a drive link, cutter, and a drive link. And so that's a standard chain that most people think about. Some tools work pretty good with semi skip or full skip chain, like this one and this one does. But then the 2-in-1 tools or the chain sharp or Husqvarna's Sharp Force, which is the original furred version. Um, that and Husqvarna sells it as a Sharp Force. That's um, that's this one, and it has doesn't have two round files, just got the flat file one. You have to flop it over to do the other side. But this I've used more for years. I've done quite a lot of training with it, and then also I was involved in the CSX tool, getting testing and stuff out on it. But is something where when you look at these tools, and first time I saw it was when Steel introduced the Pico micro chain back in the early 80s. They had a version that Ferd built for them that was a little bit shorter. It's the one like on the 5/32 version, but it was shorter, had a little orange round knob on it. And they kind of promoted it with the new Pico chain, extended pitch 3/8 that they had come out with. And you see that most of the time with them. They always introduce a chain, but then they also introduce the filing techniques with it. That same thing's happened on the hexa chain. But it's this one right here. I got to looking at it, and Soren said, I don't want to do it. I just use we did round filing, chisel bit filing. Soren had a double-sided round file handle that it was a 6-inch file, two ends of it, you'd flip it over, and you had two files to be able to use. And he sold those for years and years. And then we got into square grind. He really changed over that as far as we did on the training, just about everything, because it's so much smoother and faster. But it takes a little bit of practice. But once you get it, it's actually, I think, easier than round filing. But you have to practice it a little bit. But what I'm saying is that they came out with that guide, and we looked at it. And we said, and we'd always use the raker plate to take things down because that kept everything cut and straight. And when we saw this tool, I played with it a little bit, and I said, "Sorry, it takes the raker down at the same time." And he got to playing with it. He said, I like it. So in a lot of our training, we would show both and start to work with it. And I got a call, Mike Marshall. He was the national sales manager for Ferd, and he used to be one of the Husqvarna reps up in the New England states for years. And basically, he took and he called me up. He said, I've got these things. We don't sell a lot of them. Can we send you some things to look at? And I said, yeah. And so they sent me a box of them, and Soren and I played with it a little bit. And we said, for a city and county and firewood cutting and stuff like that, let's see if we can get it into program. So we did, and people started wanting them, and so I got it in the Husqvarna system, and it took off after that. And Mr. Ruderberg, he contacted me and said thank you one time. So I felt like I did something right. I don't know, but it's something where all of that people talk about the filing this or filing that. All of these tools, I show them all. I'm not partial really to any of them. What I'm partial to is getting all 5 parts of those cutting surfaces correct.
Right.
I mean, that's it. It doesn't make any difference if you stand on your head and do it with your toes, right?
Right. Right. It doesn't matter how you do it, as long as it'll cut when you get done doing it.
Yeah, yeah. And I've got to where, and a lot of people, criticize me on the videos and stuff, saying, well, you got to hold it like this, you got to hold it like that. What I'm looking at is what is it doing to that tooth? And like you were saying, if you got damage or you got an edge here or whatever, you got to get it corrected. So if you're going like this a little bit, to get it off there to get back to cutting, it's not a big issue as long as it ends up correct when you get finished.
Right.
True.
Exactly. Exactly.
And I haven't had many people to say your chain doesn't cut. Have you had anybody tell you your chain doesn't cut?
No.
They a lot of in the classes that I teach, oftentimes everybody will have their own saws, and it may be one of them may have a chain that's pretty boogered up, that's hit something, and we filed on it, and then they'll end up having one of my saws in their hand, and they usually finish out the entire class running one of my saws rather than theirs, because it is such a because there's a lot to be said when something just goes in like butter, especially if you're boring or something, as opposed to something you're trying to push on, it's just such a better feeling, and everything.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And you change your cutting style and techniques to really match your sharpening styles and your preferences of chain and equipment. That's part of it. That's the reason why there's so many different variables, because there's different applications, and
Mhm.
there's different wood and all that kind of stuff that you start to get your techniques together to make it work. But it all goes back to those basics. If we understand those, and I've always been one, like I said, if I understand how it works, I can generally be pretty productive at it.
Mm.
And that also maintains some safety if you got a plan to that regard.
David Breeden always says, he's on here every week too. He's not on here tonight, but he said you're trying to mimic the way the chain is when it came out of the box,
Uh-huh.
is what you're trying to do. And I mean, he's right. I mean, that's the goal, is to get it like it was when it came out of the box, because it's perfect. You can work on a little bit and get a little bit more speed out of it, if you're inclined to do that. But if you can just get it where it matches when it was new, that's the name of the game right there.
Yeah. Well, we used to sit there, they'd bring in logs, and that's where I always started talking about is not as much the species as it is specific trees, because we get in for testing, we'd get in one load of oak, from an area or whatever, and the next load of oak would be different. You get in a load of pine or spruce or fir, and it would be
Oh
different.
yeah.
And
Oh
you,
yeah.
and so the thing is that you tuned your cutting styles and your sharpening and your saw size and that kind of stuff to the wood density and the work that you're doing with it. And
Mhm.
so one thing that I found was doing those timed cuts and doing these checks and everything else, seeing how long, we were cutting railroad ties, we were cutting all kind of stuff with carbide chains and all kinds of different things back then. And the thing that I really noticed is that tuning the saw and tuning your filing, that's where you got the best and fastest cut. And when you start to look at it from that standpoint, you know exactly when that speed starts to drop off or your saw starts to sound a little bit different. And then you stop and you put it back to condition again. You try to keep that same level. And I think in the woods with the training and working with crews over the years, that was the biggest thing that always impressed them. And I heard this from guys from the Pacific Coast all the way to the east, is that my saw doesn't cut like yours. Well, I was telling them, your saw is not mine. You got a different size, you've got a different bar length, you've got a different style chain, and your chain's a little dull. Well, yeah, I know, so and so used it yesterday, and I just, I'd always heard that. There's always some excuse, and I always use that excuse too, because I always had other people using the saw in training. But it's something where it comes back down to understanding it's not cutting up to what it's designed to do. And that's what I'm saying is when you get out there in those wood types and you see those guys out there cutting, whether it's steel or organ or whatever in the shop in the technical department, they got a new design. They're trying to tweak that particular tooth to where it meets the kickback standards. It meets this, that, and another. It cuts fast, trying to make every logger and every disaster group happy, and that thing's going to work good on their saw and all this kind of stuff. They start cutting time after time after time after time to see what the advantages and disadvantages, and they mount them on different brands and type saws and bar lengths and all that kind of stuff to get that information. And that's the study. When Oregon came out with the Vanguard chain, which they had some trouble. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but it's a standard chain under 3.8 cubic inch with like Husqvarna, and you can, it's the biggest selling chain actually through the hardware stores, the Home Depots and Lowe's and stuff. Is it the depth gauge is bent over on top? Oh,
Yeah,
what's in the markets is kind of like, guys out in the field. I don't like it. I don't like it. It's changed. It's different. But the biggest thing is that depth gauge. If you tried to file it like you did the old style, put a little angle on it, oh gosh, that thing would vibrate and kick and it wouldn't cut. And so George Ruggles called me one day. He was head of technical services, and he said, "Jim, you have anything down your way? I want some good hardwood. I had some Douglas firs about 22 inches DBA across. If you got anything about that size?" Well, Hurricane Opal had just gone through, and I had a hickory tree that was down across the road on my property down in Hiram. And and I got down there. George flew in, had his briefcase and had his good boots on, and we got out there, and the only thing bad about it, it was just starting to warm up, and the poison ivy was coming up like crazy down there. But I bucked a section off of that big hickory tree, and it measured it. It was almost exact what he wanted. He brought three chains with him. He brought a brand new one, two brand new ones, and he brought one that the shop at Oregon had filed all the way back to the witness mark. Because the biggest thing the guys are saying, you can't set the raker once it gets back, it won't cut, all this kind of stuff. So those three chains. So we did time cuts first with the new chain. Then he wanted me to sharpen that chain, and we did more cuts. And then we took the new chain and compared it to that. And the last one that he handed me to put on the saw was that one they had filed all the way back. And we were checking boreability and cutting speeds. We were timing and all this stuff. And he got that one that was all the way back. And I mean, the depth gauge was down pretty thin and all this. Put it in that hickory log. That was the fastest one and the smoothest one the whole time.
Oh, yeah.
He explained something to me that I thought I didn't understand it at that time. When you think about if you're standing there and you got your feet together here, the farther you spread your legs there, the more stability you have. It's kind of like the length of a hinge versus the short hinge, right? As you file back, this point distance from here to your reference point on the raker is longer. The tooth is actually more stable as you get back there.
Right.
I started taking pictures in the back end of pickup trucks at log jobs, and they would chunk them out about like this. You'd find these little chains in the back, and the guys would give up about this position because what would happen is they would take the depth gauge down trying to get it to cut. Well, it changed the chisel angle, and now you had that awkward position, and they just gave up on it, and rightfully so. There's no sense in spending a lot of time there. Get you another one and go back to work. But if you keep that consistent, you can go all the way back there to that witness line with no problem at all. That's actually the fastest cutting. But we did find one thing. When you would cut this way, and I had this guy, he said, "Well, it cuts pretty good, but you can't cut down with it." I said, "What?" He said, "Well, you can cut up with it, but you can't cut down with it." I said, "What do you mean?" I was in Mississippi, Tim. And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, you can cut the logs up with it, but when you turn it sideways to cut down with it, it won't fell the tree." And I said, "What do you mean?" He showed me. You get halfway in and stop. And I said, "Well, it's twisting or something in the curve." So we went back and talked to George about it. And what had happened is the width here stuck out past the point when you got back a little bit. And so what they did is they narrowed that up just a little bit and took the problem away. And like I said, it became the number one. It still is today. I think the number one selling chain that they have, as far because it goes on all the OEM worldwide and that kind of stuff.
Right.
But it's
Right.
something where that look, and you know what was happening there? We found it with a little microscope camera, or they did. He told me about it. When you go sideways, the chips would fall down between the edge of the depth gauge and the side of the tooth and push it away.
Hmm.
So how important is it to think about, the tooth doesn't cut down into the gullet, but what happens on most full chisel is this sticks out past as it comes back.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens is it quits feeding the point. And so they made those adjustments, and that's the difference in those new chains that you're using.
Mm-hmm.
And if you file it right, man, that thing will cut like crazy now.
I had one just recently that I was going to see how far I could go with it. And I sharpened it all the way back and just kept running it. And I ran it till I started breaking cutters off of it to the top. And I've never done that. I've always got them back, toward the witness mark there and go ahead and swap them out. But I ran one. I said, I'm going to run it and just see how long I can run it and get away with it till I started breaking the dang cutters off that thing.
Yeah. Yeah, they do get thin after a while.
Yeah.
Chris, what do you think? When do you get much life out of the chains? Do you have to chunk them? What do you got?
We run them all the way back to the witness mark.
I guess it makes a difference if you do it right, huh?
Yes, sir. Well, it's money. You talk about the expense of chains. In my trailer, I've got, we just inventoried. So I've got 30, 36-inch chains, 30, 28s, 40, 25s, and 50, 20-inch full chisel chains. If you start doing the math,
Wow. What spools are y'all buying, Chris?
We're buying the Oregon 72 EXL.
Okay. Yeah. Good. You could buy that stuff for gosh, what was it? A whole 100-foot roll. I can't remember now, but I want to think it was under $300 or so for a 100-foot roll. And I just bought a roll, the EXJ, a few weeks ago, and the best price I could find on it was about $360 or so for the 100-foot roll, and it's just the chains have just you got a lot of money chains on loops just sitting there and everything, and I mean you can ruin them like that by hitting something.
Yeah, there's a couple different companies that I use, and I'll get on their email list if they run a 10 or 15% off. That hold on to your hat because I'll blow you up. I'll buy 5-6 rolls. Anytime I can.
Tell them about that shiny surface on there, Tim, about the chrome on the tooth and damaging the purpose of the chrome on the tooth there. A lot of people don't know about that.
On the edge here?
Yeah, if you if you knock that chrome off, it's not going to hold an edge till you file back to that chrome again.
Yeah, when you see abrasion here, like on this tooth, you can see where it's a little bit darker on the edge. And this one's hard plastic, but it's something where when you look at that, if you look at your chain and you see that's kind of raggedy on the edge, or you see the chrome kind of peeling up there, if you don't take it back past that, you don't have a cutting surface.
That's right. That chrome has a purpose on that tooth.
Yeah, that's actually your cutting surface, like a razor blade edge right there. And so you got to keep all of that damage off of it, keep it the right angles, but you got to keep all the damage off of it. And that's something where a lot of people don't look at that. And you got a little bit of flatness there. Either you're doing with a round file. A lot of times if I've got damage, I'll take a flat file and I'll take the damage off of it and then round file back out instead of just sitting there and trying to, keep the round file up there if I've got it. Because a lot of times if I'm doing training and somebody happens to put it in the ground or a rock, I've got some damage there to do. I find it quicker to locate that tooth, take a flat file, take it off, and then re-round it and go back to business. But if you whether you're taking a flat file to get the damage off or a round file to get the damage off, if you've got a little flat surface right there, it's not going to cut.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And you can really see it if you say you hit a nail or something is sort of like that. It'll pull that chrome back pretty bad on it.
The whole corner bent back up. And a lot of times right here, you'll see it. And people say, I don't know why it's not cutting, but just look down the edge right here,
Mm-hmm.
right in through here. And if you see it kind of curving in a little bit, that's where it caught something in the kerf, and that corner is rounded over. And it's hard to see sometimes. But if you
Mm-hmm.
look at it closely, you'll see how that point is rounded over. And that's one reason why I think a lot of times semi-chisel is a little bit more forgiving in that area. But if you hit something, you got a larger areas damaged in many cases than you do on the full chisel. But it is easier to correct uh, on the full chisel in some cases, but the semi-chisel will stay sharper longer, I think, in a little bit of an abrasive, situation.
Mm-hmm.
Dirty pine trees and dirty oaks in a swamp area or something.
Oh yeah. Oh,
You really
yeah.
need
I think
you
that
really need
a lot
that
of people. Go ahead, Chris.
you really need that flat file too, especially if you're using like the steel 2-in-1. I've seen if a tooth gets really boogered up,
Uh-huh.
I can't get the 2-in-1 to go through there. It jams. It doesn't want to go, but I can take that flat file and smooth it back out. Then I can take the 2-in-1. It'll run on through there.
Yeah, yeah. And a new chain, sometimes the clearance there is tight too.
Mm,
And
oh
Yeah.
yeah.
lift up a little bit and they end up with a flat surface and it's not going to cut. And people say, I don't like that chain. I don't like that chain. I just don't
You need
like
to put whoever boogered one up that bad, Chris. You need to put them on limb dragging duty for a little bit,
it.
Oh yeah,
and
we do.
and that'll remedy that right there quick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, guys,
So
go ahead.
I was going to say you was holding that the depth gauge on it a while ago, and there's two spots on the depth gauge. You got a softwood mark on it,
Uh-huh.
and you've got a hardwood mark on it. If you're here in the southeast, I always set mine. I always go by the hardwood mark. I don't put it on the. I tell folks if you file it down to the softwood mark, it's gonna be biting and it's not gonna work right. And then the only way you can correct that where the chain is biting like it is by filing that top plate back on it,
Yeah.
just working on it till you get that gap closer.
Yeah, if you've got, a fir or spruce, something like that, maybe some faster growth cedar and stuff, you're in pretty good shape with the softwood setting. But most other I always set to the hardwood setting. I
Oh
never
yeah. I
softwood.
think our only wood we have here that would be comparable to some of the softwood that's on the West Coast is probably cypress.
Mhm.
Cypress is really, really soft, and you can just lay in it. That's the only thing I can think of around here. I mean, even our sweet gums are
Yeah.
hard. Loblollies are hard. And like you said, the hardwood just kind of depends. Because if you get like a good seasoned piece of like a blow down that's been laying there for a little while and it started drying out, got kind of seasoned, that thing's like cutting freaking concrete or something,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah, you can get into ironwood and Osage orange, and I tell you, some ash trees that I've had on the higher elevations, like up through Pennsylvania and stuff like that, they're hard as a rock when they dry out. From the emerald ash borer and stuff.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of. I mean, like I always say, it's not as much the species as it is specific trees in the area.
Mhm.
That's
Right.
key. And once you put your chainsaw into it, it doesn't take about 2 seconds. You know. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just that it. If you understand your saw and you know how you sharpen and you got it adjusted and tuned to the wood, for your technique, and that's where it really shows up as best. But gentlemen, it's been a good talk tonight. We have solved a lot more world problems and haven't even got into politics, so we're in good shape.
Oh yeah.
It's something where I appreciate y'all taking the time, and because it helps to have people that know what they're doing and to help discuss things, and you guys do a good job out there, and whether it
You
be
know,
Cotton Top
I'll
3
say this
online, what.
and kind of back you up a little bit there, Tim, that, it's one thing to sit here on these feeds and what have you and do that. But man, the classes like the training that you've done over the years, Chris has been to lots of them. I've been to lots of. I've done a lot of them. Chris is doing a lot of them. He's a legacy instructor, and to be in those classes, those person to person, actually out there, that's where the rubber meets the road, man. You can get a lot from these things right here, but if you're on the fence about training, I highly suggest going to forest applications and looking and seeing where the classes are and taking the time to go to them. I could spit out some numbers. I got looked up, was able to go to a free class years ago, and it's paid off so big for me. It's unbelievable. So you cannot put a price on training. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and there's a lot of good out there. I mean, it's something where there's a lot of people that are good with the chainsaw, and they can't explain it very well. But if you get in there with them a little bit, you can learn a lot if you have an open mind and listen to it. And so a lot of different ways to train. But I do think that when you're dealing in a group of 10 to 12 guys with a good hands-on class like Cotton Tops or what Chris is doing with all the volunteers and stuff, and it makes it a learning experience,
Yes.
people, you're seeing how they work, this kind of thing. It's I'm just always amazed over the years, and like I said, I've gone through better than 70,000 people in that, and I think Dwayne passed me up.
We're going to get you mended back up. We're going to get out there on the trail and get him passed back. That's what we're going to do. Me and Chris can help you do it and get it pulled off, man.
No, they won't start on my heart now, so I don't know.
Oh gosh.
It is something where it's whatever that you pass along and understand the basics of it, and go online on Cotton Top 3 or look at Forest Apps on YouTube, and Chris has got some good stuff coming out on Instagram and some other things too. And especially if you hear local classes going on. I'm working with a group with Samaritan's Purse, God's Pit Crew, the Lutheran Disaster Group, and Sirens Project. He just came back in, so Warren's back with us. Those it's important to take the time and get out there and learn some of this stuff that people are passing along, because it can make you more productive, but it can also keep you safe out there, and that's what it's all about.
Right.
Warren, I thought you left, but I'd ask so. We about wrapping up now, but I'll hit you up next week. But guys, I appreciate it, and
Oh yeah.
let's get this over on live on Instagram tomorrow too. But I don't know if we got. Let me check you real quick to see.
There wasn't really any comments tonight. I was looking at it.
Glenn Moore's back with us.
Yeah.
And I tell you, on Instagram, when I put it out, we had about 150 people watching
Good.
last week on the video, and I got several good questions. I don't see anything. Taylor technique, Glenn says.
Well, the Taylor thing is that's a term that I coined on. If I'm gonna do the full works on the chain and really want to make one roll, I call it the Taylor sharpening is what I call it.
Yeah, I've heard you say that several times.
Yeah. I mean, I laid into a stick of wood with that thing one night down here. And I mean, when I looked up, everybody's eyes were like pie plates, because I mean, I worked on it and did everything to it. And even took on the sides of the rakers a little bit where the side plate was getting full access, because there again, like I said earlier, you're dealing with thousandths of an inch, when every thousandth on a chainsaw makes a huge difference, on what it'll do. And so just good stuff. It's fun. I just love it. I love the saws and running them, and everything. Just love it.
And a good sharpened running right's a lot less wear and tear on the body, that's for sure.
That's right. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Well, I enjoyed it, man.
Well, guys, thank you. And I'm going to be here next Thursday night again. So if y'all don't have anything, I told Tim today, if you don't have a better gig, come on over,
Oh, yeah. That'll work.
Hey.
Yeah,
All
sir.
right.
Sorry, I came in late and in and out. We were doing some work here in the workshop. It's kind of funny you guys were talking about saw chains tonight because we had the crew here and we
Oh,
were doing our little Thursday night workshop here, sharpening and going over some maintenance items and everything like that. So they all enjoyed the live stream tonight, by the way. So if you guys did all.
Yeah.
very, very good. Very good. Well, we're going to do it again next week. So
Sounds
tell them
good.
to come back. Gentlemen, I wish you all good sewing. And if you have any questions, you can get a hold of me on any of the chats. Leave it. I'll answer all of them. And same thing with Cotton Top. He'll get back to every message that comes through, and Chris will too. So anything that we can help you with, and another thing too, we do have some workshops that's out there. Chris has got some things going on with volunteers. I think Warren, you've got some coming up. So and I've got I'm doing some workshops right now. I've got the hands-on storm sawing workshop coming up in April, and David's going to be working with that one. And I've got legacy program has started up. We're going to be starting the second night on that. Got a good group on that this year. I'm going to try to do another one in the fall. And I started a series of things talking about sharpening, felling, this kind of stuff that's going to be in about hour and a half, 2 hour Zoom meetings. And so I've got that on, and also consulting that we're trying to get filled up. So but I've had some really good responses to it. So I appreciate y'all. And if I can help you out, let me know. Good song.
Yeah.
See you guys.
You know.